8. October 2023. The red steel shutters of the final Wilko shops rolled down for the very last time. Inside, shelves stripped to their bare metal frames stood like skeletons. 12,000 staff members walked away jobless, locking 93 years of British high street history behind them. What had they lost? For decades, Wilko was the beating heart of over 400 British town centres. It was the ultimate anchor store, generating £1.6 billion in annual sales. It was the destination for Saturday morning DIY runs, affordable tins of paint, stationery for the new school term, and generations of children crowding around the legendary pick and mix counters. It was an empire that felt invincible, deeply woven into the fabric of working-class Britain. Yet the contrast today is devastating. Where families once queued shoulder to shoulder at bustling tills, there is now only the cold echo of empty units and the faded ghosts of red storefronts across the country. How does an empire built on providing exactly what the British public needed simply fall apart? It wasn't just the pandemic, and it wasn't just the rise of online shopping. A toxic blend of expensive leases, a devastating loss of brand identity, and the ruthless expansion of retail park discounters slowly strangled a giant. The story of Britain's most beloved hardware and variety chain did not begin in a gleaming corporate boardroom, nor was it the product of a massive private equity buyout. It began on Charnwood Street in Leicester in the year 1930. The nation was grappling with the harsh, unforgiving realities of the Great Depression. Money was incredibly scarce, and for the working-class families of the Midlands, every single penny had to be stretched, counted, and spent with absolute care. It was into this challenging economic climate that James Kemsey Wilkinson, alongside his fiancée, Mary Cooper, opened the very first Wilkinson cash stores. The premise of their business was elegantly simple, yet profoundly effective. Provide everyday, hard-working people with essential hardware, household goods, and domestic necessities at prices they could actually afford. At the time, the term cash store was a specific retail designation indicating that goods were sold strictly for cash at the till rather than on credit or on tick. This disciplined approach allowed Wilkinson to keep his margins razor-thin and pass the savings directly onto the customer. Charnwood Street, affectionately known locally as Charney, was a bustling, vibrant artery of retail life in Leicester. It was exactly the sort of traditional British high street that has now largely faded into memory, a cacophony of independent butchers, bakers, greengrocers, and ironmongers. Here, shopkeepers knew their customers by name, and trust was the ultimate currency. James Kemsey Wilkinson understood this intimately. He did not just want to sell nails, tins of paint, and scrub brushes. He wanted his shop to be a reliable pillar of the local community. His store quickly gained a formidable reputation for value. If a family needed tools to repair a leaky roof or a new kettle for the stove, Wilkinson's was the natural destination. The founders possessed an uncanny, almost intuitive instinct for what the British public required to keep their homes running smoothly. This was not luxury retail, it was survival retail, elevated by decent, honest customer service and a genuine respect for the labouring classes who walked through the doors. By 1939, as the dark clouds of the Second World War gathered over Europe, the Wilkinson Empire had quietly grown to encompass 9 branches across the Midlands. The war years were incredibly difficult for British retail, fraught with severe rationing, supply chain disruptions, and the constant, terrifying threat of aerial bombardment. Yet, the business survived. When peace finally returned to a battered and bruised Britain, the country entered a period of intense reconstruction and eventually a newfound prosperity. The post-war era brought with it a revolution in domestic life. The 1950s and 1960s saw a massive boom in DIY, do-it-yourself culture. As families moved into newly built suburban council estates, there was an immense pride in decorating and maintaining these new homes. Wilkinson's positioned itself perfectly to capitalize on this societal shift. They stocked the wallpaper, the hammers, the gardening tools, and the cleaning supplies that helped a generation of Britons rebuild their lives and beautify their modest patches of land. What made Wilkinson so exceptionally resilient during these foundational decades was its fiercely guarded status as a family-run enterprise. It actively resisted the urge to go public or sell out to larger conglomerates. When James Kemsey Wilkinson eventually passed the reins to the next generation, his son Tony Wilkinson ensured that the original philosophy remained entirely intact. The shops expanded, the product lines broadened to include toys and health and beauty products, but the core identity never wavered. Though throughout the mid to late 20th century, Wilkinson's solidified its reputation as a trusty, dependable companion to the British household. It was a place entirely devoid of pretension. You walked through the doors knowing exactly what you were going to get. A well-stocked shop floor, highly practical goods, and a fair, honest price at the till. This foundation, built on the sweat of a Midlands family and the unwavering loyalty of the working-class shopper, was incredibly robust. It was an origin story that granted the brand a rare authenticity. However, as the 20th century marched towards its conclusion, the ambition within the Wilkinson family began to swell. They were no longer content with simply being a Midlands success story. They set their sights on conquering the entirety of the British High Street, laying the groundwork for an era of unprecedented expansion that would soon see the familiar red and white signs become an unavoidable fixture in nearly every town centre across the land. The story of Britain's most beloved hardware and variety chain did not begin in a gleaming corporate boardroom, nor was it the product of a massive private equity buyout. It began on Charnwood Street in Leicester in the year 1930. The nation was grappling with the harsh, unforgiving realities of the Great Depression. Money was incredibly scarce, and for the working-class families of the Midlands, every single penny had to be stretched, counted, and spent with absolute care. It was into this challenging economic climate that James Kemsey Wilkinson, alongside his fiancée, Mary Cooper, opened the very first Wilkinson cash stores. The premise of their business was elegantly simple, yet profoundly effective. Provide everyday, hard-working people with essential hardware, household goods, and domestic necessities at prices they could actually afford. At the time, the term cash store was a specific retail designation indicating that goods were sold strictly for cash at the till rather than on credit or on tick. This disciplined approach allowed Wilkinson to keep his margins razor-thin and pass the savings directly onto the customer. Charnwood Street, affectionately known locally as Charney, was a bustling, vibrant artery of retail life in Leicester. It was exactly the sort of traditional British high street that has now largely faded into memory, a cacophony of independent butchers, bakers, greengrocers, and ironmongers. Here, shopkeepers knew their customers by name, and trust was the ultimate currency. James Kemsey Wilkinson understood this intimately. He did not just want to sell nails, tins of paint, and scrub brushes. He wanted his shop to be a reliable pillar of the local community. His store quickly gained a formidable reputation for value. If a family needed tools to repair a leaky roof or a new kettle for the stove, Wilkinson's was the natural destination. The founders possessed an uncanny, almost intuitive instinct for what the British public required to keep their homes running smoothly. This was not luxury retail. It was survival retail, elevated by decent, honest customer service and a genuine respect for the labouring classes who walked through the doors. By 1939, as the dark clouds of the Second World War gathered over Europe, the Wilkinson Empire had quietly grown to encompass 9 branches across the Midlands. The war years were incredibly difficult for British retail, fraught with severe rationing, supply chain disruptions, and the constant, terrifying threat of aerial bombardment. Yet the business survived. When peace finally returned to a battered and bruised Britain, the country entered a period of intense reconstruction and eventually a newfound prosperity. As the 1980s transitioned into the 1990s, the Wilkinson family business initiated a phase of aggressive, unapologetic expansion that would forever alter the geography of British retail. They stepped boldly out of their traditional Midlands stronghold, bringing their unique brand of no-nonsense, working-class value to every corner of the United Kingdom. The strategic vision was clear, deliberate, and brilliantly executed to absolutely dominate the traditional British high street. During this era, while other major retailers were beginning to eye the expansive, out-of-town retail parks with increasing interest, Wilkinson anchored itself firmly in the very center of towns and cities. They sought out large, prominent retail units, often taking over and breathing new life into historic buildings vacated by less fortunate businesses or struggling department stores. The familiar, bold red and white signage became a beacon of affordability. When a new Wilkinson store opened its doors in a town, it was a genuine local event, often accompanied by queues stretching down the pavement and local mayors cutting ribbons. The operational scale of this expansion was staggering. To feed the relentless demand of hundreds of new shops, massive distribution centers were constructed, operating around the clock. By the early 2000s, the company boasted over 400 stores nationwide. They employed more than 20,000 members of staff, and annual sales soared past the astonishing £1.5 billion mark. Wilkinson had transformed from a humble Leicester hardware shop into a national retail titan. Crucially, it was no longer just a shop, it had become the indisputable anchor store of the British High Street. In many working-class towns, the local Wilkinson was the primary engine driving footfall. If Wilkinson was busy, the surrounding independent butchers, bakeries, and newsagents thrived on the overflow of shoppers. If it were to ever close, the high street would suffer a devastating blow. But at this golden moment in time, the idea of Wilkinson closing was utterly unthinkable. It felt as permanent as the local post office, the parish church, or the town hall. It was a fortress of commerce, entirely woven into the civic architecture of Britain. To truly understand the colossal scale of Wilkinson's success during this golden era, one must look far beyond the impressive financial figures and examine the profound cultural footprint it left behind. A Saturday morning trip to Wilkinson became a deeply ingrained, almost sacred ritual for millions of British families. The stores were brilliantly chaotic labyrinths of utility, necessity, and sheer temptation. The genius of Wilkinson lay in its unparalleled variety. You could walk through the automatic sliding doors with the strict intention of buying a single tin of brilliant white emulsion paint and some masking tape for a weekend DIY project, and somehow find yourself at the tills an hour later with a basket heavily laden with garden trowels, discounted toiletries, a new set of ceramic mugs, a multi-pack of dog food, and a towering cup of sweets. Ah, the pick and mix. For an entire generation of British children, the Wilkinson pick and mix counter was a brightly lit sanctuary at the back of the shop. Armed with a plastic cup, children would meticulously strategize how to cram as many foam bananas, cola bottles, fried eggs, and chocolate mice into the container as physically possible. They would press the sweets down to eliminate any wasted airspace, a serious architectural endeavor, while their parents queued patiently at the tills nearby. It was a rite of passage, a small weekend luxury that working-class parents could comfortably afford to give their children. The stores completely mastered the rhythm of British domestic life. In late August, the aisles transformed into a frenzy of frantic parents and children preparing for the new school term, clearing shelves of cheap stationery, ring binders, and pencil cases. Come spring, the entrance was a riot of compost bags, flower bulbs, and cheap plastic planters. At Christmas, the shops became glittering caves of affordable baubles, wrapping paper, and novelty stocking fillers. Wilkinson succeeded so completely because it catered to absolutely everyone. It was the lifeline for the student equipping their first university halls on a shoestring budget. It was the go-to for the young couple excitedly decorating their first modest home. It was the dependable supplier for the pensioner buying affordable gardening supplies on a Tuesday morning. The staff, often locals who had worked there for years and knew the stockroom intimately, greeted regular customers by name. The brand commanded a fierce, multi-generational loyalty that marketing money simply could not buy. By the late 2000s, the empire was at its absolute zenith. The Wilkinson family had built a retail stronghold that seemed entirely impervious to economic downturns. After all, the conventional logic dictated that when money was tight, People needed discount stores more than ever. They were the undisputed champions of the high street, seemingly invincible. Yet, beneath this glossy veneer of dominance, the retail landscape of the United Kingdom was beginning to shift in profound, irreversible, and highly dangerous ways. A perfect storm of ruthless new competitors, rapidly changing consumer habits, and fatal internal miscalculations was gathering just over the horizon. The golden era had reached its peak, and the long, agonizing descent into Act Two was about to begin. The post-war era brought with it a revolution in domestic life. The 1950s and 1960s saw a massive boom in DIY, do-it-yourself, culture. As families moved into newly built suburban council estates, there was an immense pride in decorating and maintaining these new homes. Wilkinson's positioned itself perfectly to capitalize on this societal shift. They stocked the wallpaper, the hammers, the gardening tools, and the cleaning supplies that helped a generation of Britons rebuild their lives and beautify their modest patches of land. What made Wilkinson so exceptionally resilient during these foundational decades was its fiercely guarded status as a family-run enterprise. It actively resisted the urge to go public or sell out to larger conglomerates. When James Kemsey Wilkinson eventually passed the reins to the next generation, his son Tony Wilkinson ensured that the original philosophy remained entirely intact. The shops expanded, the product lines broadened to include toys and health and beauty products, but the core identity never wavered. Throughout the mid to late 20th century, Wilkinson solidified its reputation as a trusty, dependable companion to the British household. It was a place entirely devoid of pretension. You walked through the doors knowing exactly what you were going to get: a well-stocked shop floor, highly practical goods, and a fair, honest price at the till. This foundation, built on the sweat of a Midlands family and the unwavering loyalty of the working-class shopper, was incredibly robust. It was an origin story that granted the brand a rare authenticity. However, as the 20th century marched towards its conclusion, the ambition within the Wilkinson family began to swell. They were no longer content with simply being a Midlands success story. They set their sights on conquering the entirety of the British high street, laying the groundwork for an era of unprecedented expansion that would soon see the familiar red and white signs become an unavoidable fixture in nearly every town centre across the land. As the first decade of the new millennium drew to a close and the 2000s began, the retail landscape of the United Kingdom was undergoing a seismic, structural shift. For decades, Wilko had reigned supreme by establishing total dominance over traditional town centres and indoor shopping centres. They were the undisputed champions of the high street. But quietly, relentlessly, on the peripheries of towns and cities, a new, ferocious breed of competitors was gathering strength. These were the aggressive, fast-moving discount chains, B&M, Home Bargains, and Poundland. They were lean, they were ruthless, and they were entirely unburdened by the vast historical baggage that Wilko carried. The primary battleground for the British shopper's wallet was no longer the historic, cobbled high street. It was shifting rapidly to the out-of-town retail park. For the modern consumer, heavily reliant on the motorcar and increasingly pressed for time, the appeal of the retail park was becoming utterly impossible to ignore. These locations offered massive, warehouse-style units, wide, easily navigable aisles, and, most crucially of all, vast, free car parks. Shoppers no longer wanted the hassle of navigating congested town centre traffic systems, paying exorbitant parking fees at grim, concrete multi-storey car parks, and then lugging heavy bags of compost, bulky multi-packs of toilet roll, and heavy tins of dog food back through the rain to their vehicles. They wanted the sheer, frictionless convenience of pulling up directly outside a massive discount shed, loading the boot of their car to the brim, and driving home. The new challengers completely understood this fundamental shift in consumer psychology. Businesses like B&M, driven by astute private investment, built their expanding empires entirely on this out-of-town model. Their shops were not designed to be beautiful. They were essentially large, brightly lit, industrial warehouses fitted with concrete floors and basic, industrial shelving. They spent virtually nothing on complex store fits, ambient lighting or elaborate window displays. Instead, their entire focus was on price. They bought stock in massive, unprecedented volumes, often capitalizing on grey market goods, clearance lines, or cancelled orders from other retailers. This ruthless procurement strategy allowed them to slash retail prices to the absolute bone, offering famous household brands at prices that seemed almost impossibly low. Wilko, however, was fundamentally a high street beast. Their entire corporate identity, their real estate portfolio, and their emotional connection with the public were deeply woven into the fabric of town centre shopping. While this positioning had been their greatest and most unassailable strength in the 1990s, it was rapidly and tragically becoming their most fatal vulnerability. To truly understand the deadly squeeze Wilko now faced, one must understand the deeply punishing, almost archaic economics of the British high street. Operating a massive, multi-floor anchor store in a central shopping centre or on a prime high street is an eye-wateringly expensive endeavour. Wilko was legally locked into long-term, highly inflexible leases that had been enthusiastically signed during the retail boom years of the late 90s and early 2000s. Many of these contracts stretched for 10, 15, or even 20 years, often containing toxic, upward-only rent review clauses. This meant that no matter how bad the economy got or how much footfall dropped, the rent could only ever go up, never down. Corporate landlords, particularly the large institutional pension funds that owned the nation's shopping centres, were notoriously stubborn and fiercely unwilling to negotiate downwards. Layered brutally on top of these crippling commercial rents were the deeply controversial business rates, a property tax levied on commercial premises by the UK government. Because Wilko occupied incredibly large prime retail footprints in central locations, their annual business rates bills were astronomical, often running into the tens of millions of pounds across the estate. While their out-of-town competitors at the retail parks enjoyed significantly cheaper rents and drastically lower business rates per square foot, Wilko was hemorrhaging cash simply to unlock its front doors every morning. This massive, structural disparity in fixed overheads inevitably trickled down to the price tags on the shelves. For the first time in its long, proud history, Wilko was no longer the cheapest option in town. The working-class shoppers who had fiercely championed the brand for decades are inherently savvy. They know exactly the value of a hard-earned pound. When a family realized they could drive to a retail park and buy their favorite branded shampoo, a large box of washing powder, and a tin of biscuits significantly cheaper at Home Bargains or B&M, their decades of loyalty to Wilko were severely tested. Slowly but surely, the traditional Saturday shopping trips began to migrate away from the high street. Wilko's executive management found themselves completely paralyzed by this structural trap. They could not simply pack up and abandon the high street. The legal costs of breaking hundreds of long-term leases would have bankrupted the company overnight. Furthermore, the high street was their heritage. Leaving it felt like a betrayal of their very soul and founding principles. Yet, staying meant enduring plunging footfall as British town centres began a long, painful, and highly visible decline. Banks closed their branches, local pubs boarded up their windows, and independent shops vanished, replaced only by a proliferation of charity shops and betting parlours. As the towns hollowed out, the steady, reliable stream of passing trade that Wilko heavily relied upon dried up completely. The squeeze was suffocating. The beloved brand was caught in a deadly financial vice, trapped by the astronomical, inescapable costs of its glorious past, and fiercely undercut by the ruthless, stripped-back efficiency of its new rivals. The once invincible fortress was starting to show deep, structural cracks, and the pressure on the balance sheet was only just beginning to build. As the external pressures from the out-of-town retail parks mounted, a dangerous sense of panic began to seep into the boardroom at the company's headquarters in Worksop. The executive team, watching their market share being slowly but steadily eroded by aggressive, lean discounters, concluded that the business desperately needed to modernize. They diagnosed the problem not primarily as one of uncompetitive pricing or suffocating real estate costs, but as an issue of brand perception. To the new management, the name Wilkinson felt antiquated. It sounded like an old-fashioned ironmonger from the 1930s, deeply out of step with the slick, fast-paced retail environment of the 21st century. Consequently, between 2012 and 2014, the company embarked on a massive, multi-million-pound rebranding exercise. The historic, trusted name, Wilkinson, was systematically scrubbed from the British high street. The traditional signage was ripped down and replaced with a modern, lowercase bubble font logo, Wilko. The intention was to appear fresh, friendly, and contemporary, adopting a snappy, colloquial nickname that the public supposedly already used in casual conversation. However, this corporate facelift was a profound miscalculation of what their core demographic actually valued. The British working-class shopper had not remained fiercely loyal for decades because the logo was trendy. They came because they trusted the heritage, the family name, and the rock-solid promise of value. By erasing the name Wilkinson, the executives inadvertently stripped away the brand's most powerful and irreplicable asset, its history. The shops suddenly felt less like a dependable, family-run institution and more like a generic, corporate discount chain trying far too hard to be youthful. It alienated an aging, deeply loyal customer base who felt that their shop had been taken away and replaced by a corporate imposter. The expensive rebrand completely failed to attract a new, younger generation of shoppers, but it successfully diluted the deep affection of the old one. While millions of pounds were being poured into changing shop fascias and updating staff uniforms to match the new Wilko branding, a far more lethal cancer was quietly metastasizing behind the scenes. The supply chain, a successful discount operation, lives or dies by its logistics. Rivals like B&M and Home Bargains were investing heavily in state-of-the-art, highly automated distribution networks, ensuring their sprawling warehouses were always packed to the rafters with fast-moving stock. Wilko, conversely, was operating on severely outdated IT systems and deeply inefficient logistical frameworks that simply had not kept pace with the sheer size and complexity of the estate. Long before the word pandemic ever entered the public vocabulary, alarming cracks began to appear on the shop floor. Customers who had traveled into the town center specifically for their Saturday Wilko run began noticing something profoundly unsettling: empty shelves. A shopper might walk in expecting to buy their usual brand of washing-up liquid, a specific tin of dog food, or a standard pack of batteries, only to find a gaping void where the product should be. For a high-street anchor store, this was operational suicide. The primary reason people visited Wilko was for reliable, everyday essentials. If a customer visited twice and left empty-handed because the stock had simply not arrived from the regional depot, they would not return for a third attempt. They would get in their car and drive to a retail park instead, where the shelves of the competitors were consistently fully stocked. This logistical chaos severely damaged staff morale. Dedicated shop assistants, many of whom had worked for the company for decades and knew their local customers by name, were forced to spend their days apologizing to frustrated shoppers for stock shortages they could not control. Meanwhile, in the boardroom, tensions were reaching boiling point. The Wilkinson family, still majority shareholders, struggled to align with the rotating cast of external chief executives brought in to halt the decline. The company lacked a coherent, unified strategy. They were trapped in a vicious cycle. Falling sales led to brutal budget cuts, which led to deteriorating store standards and broken supply lines, which in turn led to even fewer customers. The heart of the British high street was suffering from a critical lack of supply, and its lifeblood was slowly draining away. When the world ground to an abrupt and terrifying halt in March 2020, the British retail sector was thrown into unprecedented chaos. As the government mandated a strict national lockdown, thousands of shops were forced to pull down their shutters indefinitely. For Wilko, however, the initial announcement appeared to offer a rare glimmer of hope amidst the gloom. Because the chain sold cleaning products, basic hardware, and pet food, it was officially classified by the government as an essential retailer. While department stores and fashion chains plunged into darkness, Wilko was legally permitted to keep its doors open to the public. On paper, this essential status seemed like a golden ticket, a lifeline that would allow the company to keep trading while its rivals were frozen. The reality, however, was a cruel and punishing paradox. Wilko was allowed to open, but its core customer base was legally ordered to stay at home. The fundamental problem lay once again in geography. Wilko was overwhelmingly a high street and shopping centre business. During the lockdowns, British town centres became echoing ghost towns. When people did venture out for essential supplies, they heavily favoured the massive, out-of-town supermarkets with their cavernous aisles and sprawling car parks, where social distancing felt significantly safer and easier to manage. Alternatively, they flocked to the retail parks, where discount rivals like B&M and Home Bargains, also classified as essential, enjoyed record-breaking sales. Nobody wanted to navigate the tight, enclosed spaces of an indoor shopping centre, or walk down a deserted, boarded-up high street just to buy a bottle of bleach. Consequently, Wilko found itself in the worst possible financial position. The shops were open, the lights were on, and the loyal staff were braving the terrifying early days of the virus to stand dutifully behind their perspex screens at the tills. The massive overheads, staffing costs, and utility bills were still draining the company's accounts daily, but the footfall had entirely vanished. They were bleeding cash, enduring all the immense running costs of a fully operational retail empire with only a fraction of the revenue coming in. When the lockdowns finally lifted and the dust began to settle, the anticipated surge of returning customers simply did not materialize. The pandemic had permanently accelerated the shift towards online shopping and out-of-town retail parks. But an even greater threat was rapidly approaching. As the global economy restarted, it triggered a devastating supply chain crisis and soaring inflation. The cost of shipping raw materials, energy, and everyday goods skyrocketed. For a discount retailer like Wilko, which operated on incredibly thin profit margins, this inflationary pressure was catastrophic. By 2022, the financial strain had become critical. The business was hemorrhaging money, desperately trying to service a mountain of debt, while revenues continued to shrink. In a frantic bid to inject liquidity into the failing business, the executives resorted to a classic corporate distress maneuver. In late 2022, Wilko sold its enormous, state-of-the-art distribution centre in Worksop, one of its most valuable physical assets, for £48 million, only to immediately lease it back. It was the retail equivalent of pawning the family silver just to pay the week's heating bill. They were trading long-term stability for mere months of short-term survival. But this desperate financial engineering could not hide the truth from the wider industry. The retail market is heavily reliant on confidence, and confidence in Wilko was rapidly evaporating. The fatal blow came not from the customers, but from the credit insurers. These are the institutions that provide insurance to suppliers, guaranteeing they will be paid if a retailer goes bust. Sensing the deep structural rot within Wilko's balance sheet, the major credit insurers abruptly withdrew their cover. This triggered an immediate and devastating panic among Wilko's suppliers. Terrified that they would deliver millions of pounds worth of stock and never see a penny in return, major brands and manufacturers demanded upfront cash payments or simply halted deliveries altogether. The logistical cracks mentioned earlier now widened into gaping chasms. The supply chain completely collapsed. The trickle of goods arriving at the stores stopped entirely. Inside the shops, the atmosphere turned funereal. The shelves, once famously packed with an Aladdin's cave of household bargains, were stripped back to vast, depressing expanses of bare metal pegboards. Loyal customers walked into their local Wilko, saw the desolate, echoing aisles, and immediately turned around, never to return. The vicious cycle was now complete and inescapable. Without credit, they could not buy stock. Without stock, they had no customers. Without customers, they had no cash. The proud Leicester hardware store, which had survived the Great Depression and the Second World War, was completely out of money, out of time, and out of options. The brutal machinery of corporate insolvency was quietly shifting into gear. By the height of the summer of 2023, the internal hemorrhaging at Wilko could no longer be contained behind closed boardroom doors. The desolate, empty shelves and the eerie quietness of the shop floors had already broadcast the company's distress to the general public, But the final, fatal blow was dealt in the cold, unfeeling realm of corporate finance. On the 3rd of August, the company filed a formal notice of intention to appoint administrators. It was a stark legal declaration that the business was entirely out of cash, out of runway, and fundamentally incapable of paying its debts. For the 12,000 staff members working across the country, the news broke not through gentle internal communication, but via frantic news alerts on their mobile phones while they stood behind their tills. The psychological toll of this uncertainty was immense. For many, Wilko was not just a temporary job, it was a career, a surrogate family, and a cornerstone of their local community. Now they were forced to smile and serve the dwindling number of customers, entirely unsure if they would receive their next paycheck. Exactly 1 week later, on the 10th of August 2023, the inevitable occurred. Wilko officially collapsed into administration, and the restructuring giant PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, was appointed to take control of the business. In the United Kingdom, entering administration does not immediately equate to liquidation. It is essentially a legal life support machine, a mechanism designed to protect the company from its creditors, while the administrators desperately scramble to find a buyer, ideally selling the business as a going concern to save the shops and the jobs. The clock immediately began ticking. The administrators had a brutally short window to secure a rescue deal before the cash completely evaporated and the estate had to be carved up. The initial days of the administration sparked a frantic, high-stakes bidding war. Various private equity firms and retail competitors circled the wounded beast, poring over Wilko's notoriously complex balance sheets. However, it quickly became apparent that most interested parties did not want to save the Wilko empire. They merely wanted to pick its bones clean. They were interested in stripping the valuable brand name or poaching the most lucrative store leases, but they had absolutely no desire to take on the massive workforce, the pension liabilities, or the crumbling logistical infrastructure. Then, a glimmer of genuine hope emerged. Doug Putman, the Canadian retail billionaire who had miraculously rescued the entertainment retailer HMV from the brink of total destruction just years prior, stepped into the fray. Putman understood the British High Street. He understood heritage brands. His ambitious proposal involved keeping up to 300 Wilko shops open and saving the vast majority of the 12,000 jobs. For a few tense, electrifying weeks in late August and early September, it genuinely felt as though a white knight had arrived to drag Wilko back from the abyss. Behind the scenes, however, the negotiations were a nightmarish labyrinth of structural rot and corporate red tape. The fundamental problem with saving Wilko was that the business was tethered to incredibly expensive, antiquated IT and supply chain contracts. The technology backbone of the retailer was heavily outsourced to tech giants, and the costs associated with either untangling the new owner from these legacy systems or upgrading them to modern standards were astronomical. Putman and his financial backers crunched the numbers relentlessly, trying to find a viable path forward. But the deeper they dug into the operational mechanics of the business, the more toxic the chalice appeared. The central infrastructure required to run a massive discount retail chain had become prohibitively expensive, far outweighing the potential profits to be made from selling cheap hardware and toiletries. The emotional roller coaster for the staff was agonizing. One day, newspaper headlines confidently declared that a rescue deal was imminent. The next, sources whispered that the talks were faltering. The shop workers were trapped in a cruel purgatory, watching the administrators slowly reduce prices on the remaining stock to generate emergency cash, whilst praying that Putman's deal would cross the finish line. The crushing reality finally hit on the 11th of September 2023. It was officially announced that Doug Putman's rescue bid had collapsed. The insurmountable costs of restructuring the company's deeply flawed operational framework had proved simply too heavy a burden for his financial backers to bear. With the failure of this final, comprehensive rescue attempt, the life support machine was switched off. The administrators from PwC were left with absolutely no alternative. The hope of saving the business as a going concern was officially dead. The announcement that followed was the one everyone had dreaded. Wilko, a 93-year-old titan of the British High Street, would be entirely liquidated. Every single one of its 400 stores would close. All 12,000 staff members would be made redundant. The administration had failed, and the final, heartbreaking chapter of closure was about to begin. When the fatal announcement finally broke that Doug Putman's rescue deal had entirely collapsed, the atmosphere across the Wilko estate shifted overnight. The agonizing purgatory of anxious hope was abruptly replaced by terminal despair. The administrators from PwC had no other legal recourse but to immediately trigger the liquidation process. Overnight, the familiar, friendly red storefronts across the United Kingdom were plastered with garish, fluorescent yellow and black posters. The bold, unfeeling, capitalized letters screamed out to the passing high street, "Administration sale, everything must go, store closing down." It was the undeniable death warrant of a retail giant, printed on cheap paper and heavily taped to the glass windows. What followed in those final, brutal weeks of September and early October 2023 was a deeply undignified end for a once proud institution. The liquidation sale transformed the shops from trusted community pillars into chaotic scavenging grounds. Customers who had perhaps not visited a Wilko in years suddenly flooded back through the doors, not out of loyalty, but drawn by the scent of a heavily discounted bargain. The administrators systematically slashed prices, first by 20%, then 30%, then 50%. The physical degradation of the store environments was rapid and shocking to witness. Because the supply chain had completely collapsed weeks prior, no new stock was arriving to replenish the shelves. As the heavily discounted items were stripped away by frantic bargain hunters, the shops began to look deeply skeletal. Aisle after aisle of white metal pegboards and bare shelving units were exposed. The legendary pick and mix counters, once the vibrant, sticky epicenter of Saturday morning joy for generations of British children, sat entirely empty, their plastic compartments hollow and gathering dust. The lighting in many stores was partially dimmed to save on crippling utility bills, casting long, melancholic shadows across the scuffed linoleum floors. Handwritten signs appeared on empty fixtures, directing customers to the ever-shrinking clusters of remaining stock at the front of the shop. You could find scattered, random assortments of goods, a solitary tin of emulsion paint, a handful of obscure gardening tools, and stacks of damaged stationery. The sheer indignity of the liquidation process was palpable. The business was being entirely hollowed out from the inside, stripped of its dignity, pound by pound, penny by penny. Amidst this chaotic, deeply depressing scramble for discounted bleach and cheap pet food stood the staff. This is where the true, devastating tragedy of the Wilko collapse unfolded. 12,000 men and women were suddenly thrust into the terrifying reality of unemployment during a crippling national cost of living crisis. For the vast majority of these workers, Wilko was never just a transient job to pay the bills. It was a deeply ingrained way of life. The company had a famously high retention rate. It was incredibly common to find shop floor assistants, store managers, and warehouse staff who had worn the red and grey uniform for 10, 20, or even 30 years. In many working-class towns, multiple generations of the same family worked in the local branch. They had met their partners in the staff break rooms. They had watched their colleagues' children grow up, and they possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of their regular customers. Yet, in these final weeks, the loyalty demanded of them was bordering on the absolute cruel. Despite knowing with absolute certainty that they were losing their livelihoods, and knowing that their statutory redundancy pay would be the bare minimum legally allowed, these staff members continued to turn up for their shifts. They stood dutifully behind the tills, scanning through the heavily discounted items, whilst dealing with customers who were sometimes entirely insensitive to the tragedy unfolding before them. Some shoppers would loudly complain about the lack of specific stock or haggle over the price of a damaged item, seemingly oblivious to the fact that the person serving them was watching their entire career disintegrate. But there was also profound, heartbreaking solidarity. Across the country, local communities rallied around their Wilko workers. Longtime customers brought in boxes of chocolates, handwritten thank you cards, and bouquets of flowers to the till staff. Tears were openly shed on the shop floor as elderly shoppers, who had visited the same store every Tuesday for 2 decades, came in to say their final, emotional goodbyes. The staff spent their final days not just selling off the dregs of the stock, but physically dismantling the shops they had loved. They were forced to take down the shelving units, pack away the till systems, and sweep the floors of a business that no longer existed. They were essentially digging their own corporate graves. The execution of the estate was staggered, with groups of shops closing in waves throughout late September, but the absolute finality arrived in the first week of October. Sunday, the 8th of October 2023, marked the official end. On this day, the last 41 Wilko shops across the United Kingdom opened their doors for the very last time. By this point, there was virtually nothing left to sell. The shops were echoing caverns of bare metal and silence. The atmosphere was funereal. As the final hours ticked down, staff members gathered at the front of the stores. Many were dressed in their red uniforms for the last time, hugging each other tightly, wiping away tears, and taking final group photographs beneath the Wilko signage. The profound sense of grief was raw and unfiltered. It was the sudden, violent severing of a community bond that had existed for nearly a century. At the designated closing time, the final customers were gently ushered out into the British afternoon. The glass automatic doors were locked from the inside, and then the defining sound of the collapse echoed across dozens of high streets simultaneously. The loud, metallic rattle of the heavy steel security shutters rolling down to the pavement for the final time. The padlocks were snapped shut. The keys were handed over to the administrators. With that final click of the locks, the Leicester hardware empire that James Kemsey Wilkinson had built from nothing in the harsh winter of 1930 was officially erased from the physical world. 12,000 people walked away into an uncertain future. The shops went dark. The high street felt immediately, noticeably emptier. Wilko was gone. The moment the final, heavy steel shutters met the pavement, the corpse of the Wilko empire was not allowed to rest in peace. It was almost immediately dissected and carved up by the very retail giants that had been relentlessly stealing its market share for the past decade. In the ruthless world of high street business, the death of an institution is simply a golden opportunity for others to expand their territory. This post-collapse phase was not a rescue. It was a feeding frenzy. The administrators from PwC, legally bound to claw back as much cash as possible for furious creditors, began auctioning off the dismembered parts of the estate. First in line were B&M and Poundland. These discount rivals had absolutely no intention of buying the Wilko business as a going concern, and they certainly had no desire to take on the crippling debts or save the 12,000 jobs. The only thing they coveted was the real estate. They swooped in to snap up the leasehold rights to dozens of Wilko's most lucrative, prime locations for a fraction of their true value, instantly transforming the fortresses of their fallen rival into new outposts for their own expanding empires. These shops were quickly repainted, rebranded, and restaffed. The physical footprint of Wilko was systematically and coldly erased from town centers across the country. However, there was one final asset that retained immense intangible value: the brand itself. Even though the original company was entirely broken, the name Wilko still carried 9 decades of recognition, deep consumer loyalty, and a profound place in British shopping culture. Recognizing this, CDS Superstores, the parent company of the homeware retailer The Range, stepped in to purchase Wilko's intellectual property, website domain, and trademarks for a mere £5 million. For a brand that had generated £1.6 billion in annual sales at its zenith, this figure felt like a final insult, a bargain basement price for a national retail icon. Under this new ownership, a strange and deeply conflicted revival began. The Wilko.com website was resurrected, offering home delivery and click-and-collect services. Slowly, a handful of new concept Wilko shops began to reappear in carefully selected locations, selling familiar household and personal care products, and even bringing back the iconic pick-and-mix counters. These new shops were bright, clean, and entirely unburdened by the expensive legacy leases. or the antiquated supply chain systems that had killed the original business. But for those who had loved and worked for the original brand, this resurrection offered a bitterly hollow comfort. It was like looking at a ghost. The brand survived. The logo featured the same familiar letters, but the soul was dead. The original Leicester-based, family-run empire, the unique, multi-generational working culture, the deep connection to the working-class industrial town centres, and the livelihoods of 12,000 staff members had been swept away forever. The original retail institution had been replaced by a reincarnated commercial shell. The saviors had kept the name alive on the internet and at a few retail parks. But they did not save the real Wilko. The true Wilko died the day those red shutters closed forever in tears. The ultimate irony of retail history is that today, a customer can once again buy Wilko-branded goods inside a branch of the range or scroll through their products on a mobile phone screen. But it is no longer the undisputed anchor store of the British High Street. It is merely a commercial endeavour trading on the nostalgia of the British public, leaving behind a massive physical and cultural void in the very places it once so proudly dominated. The collapse of Wilko was not merely a corporate failure, it was a deeply traumatic event for the British High Street, leaving behind physical scars that are still starkly visible today. When those 400 red shutters rolled down for the final time in October 2023, they created massive, gaping voids in the absolute centre of hundreds of towns and cities. Because Wilko was fundamentally an anchor store, occupying some of the largest and most prominent retail units available, these empty buildings are virtually impossible to ignore. Today, if you walk through a typical British shopping centre or down a traditional high street, the ghost of Wilko lingers heavily. Many of these vast spaces remain entirely boarded up, gathering dust behind unfeeling "To Let" signs. They stand as depressing, monolithic monuments to a bygone era of retail. The sudden loss of footfall that Wilko generated has had a devastating domino effect on the surrounding independent businesses. The small butchers, the local cafes, and the independent greengrocers who relied heavily on the passing trade generated by Saturday morning Wilko shoppers have found it increasingly difficult to survive in the desolate vacuum left behind. The high street feels undeniably quieter, less vibrant, and fundamentally fractured. However, the legacy of Wilko extends far beyond empty real estate. It serves as a profound and brutal lesson in the unforgiving nature of modern commerce. The story of James Kemsey Wilkinson's humble Leicester hardware store is a classic cautionary tale of institutional hubris. Wilko ultimately fell because it committed the cardinal sin of retail. It assumed that its glorious past would eternally protect its future. The executives fundamentally misunderstood the changing dynamics of the British shopper. They believed that the public's deep-rooted affection for the brand, built over 90 years, would be enough to sustain them through shifting economic tides. But affection alone cannot pay exorbitant leases, nor can nostalgia restock empty shelves. When confronted with the aggressive, lean efficiency of the out-of-town retail parks and the relentless rise of e-commerce, Wilko remained rigidly tethered to an outdated, highly expensive high street model. Their attempts to modernize, like the disastrous rebranding exercise, focused on superficial aesthetics rather than addressing the critical, structural rot within their supply chain and IT infrastructure. They were fundamentally outmaneuvered by younger, hungrier competitors who understood precisely what the modern working-class consumer demanded: frictionless convenience and absolute rock-bottom prices. Yet, despite the catastrophic financial mismanagement and the undignified nature of its collapse, the public memory of Wilko remains deeply, almost stubbornly affectionate. It is remembered not for the empty shelves of its final days, but for the warmth and utility it provided during its peak. It is remembered as the place where a young couple bought the cheap paint to decorate their very first home, where families spent Saturday mornings browsing aisles of garden tools and multi-packs of biscuits, and where generations of British children meticulously filled plastic cups at the pick-and-mix counter. Retail is rarely just about the cold transaction of money for goods. At its very best, it is about community, habit, and a sense of belonging. Wilko was woven into the mundane but essential fabric of everyday British life. When the company was liquidated, the country did not just lose a discount hardware store, it lost a dependable, familiar friend. The brand may have been cynically resurrected online by new owners, but the original soul of the enterprise, the community-focused, family-run institution that truly understood the working classes, was irrevocably lost. The fall of Wilko stands as a poignant reminder that no empire, no matter how beloved or deeply entrenched in the national consciousness, is ever truly safe. It is a stark warning to any retailer that rests on its laurels. The British High Street is evolving at a ruthless pace, and those who refuse to adapt will inevitably find themselves relegated to the history books, remembered only by the faded outlines of their signage and the empty, echoing spaces they leave behind. The story of Wilko is a stark reminder that in the unforgiving world of modern retail, no amount of public affection can substitute for a viable business model. It proves that a colossal empire can entirely vanish from the high street, even when millions of people still hold it deeply dear to their hearts. Wilko did not collapse overnight due to a single isolated mistake. It was slowly suffocated by a toxic combination of rigid, expensive leases, aggressive out-of-town competition, a catastrophic loss of brand identity, and a corporate belief that a glorious past was an ironclad guarantee of future survival. But beyond the balance sheets, the administration notices, and the corporate post-mortems, the true legacy of Wilko is profoundly human. The history of British retail is not merely a record of financial transactions. It is the history of our high streets, our town centres, and our daily routines. It is the collective memory of Saturday morning shopping trips with the family, the careful selection of a new tin of paint for the living room, and the chaotic joy of children crowding around the pick and mix counter. Retail, at its very best, is about community, familiarity, and the comforting rhythm of everyday life. When those heavy steel shutters rolled down for the final time, the physical shops may have been lost, and the original company may have been erased, but the memories they forged over 93 years remain a cherished part of British working-class culture. The high street is constantly evolving, often quietly and ruthlessly, but the empty spaces left behind by these fallen giants serve as poignant monuments to the days when town centres were the undisputed beating heart of the nation. Thank you for watching this documentary on the rise and fall of Wilko. If you have your own memories of shopping or working there, please share them in the comments below. We would love to read them. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the forgotten stories of British retail history.